I had been searching for an escape from the endless noise of the city when I found an online listing for a cabin tucked away deep in the foothills of West Virginia. It seemed perfect, cheap, isolated, and surrounded by untouched forest. The price was far lower than it should have been, so I asked the owner why. Her reply was unsettling. She looked toward the woods, her smile thin and forced, and said only, "It's just that time of year." The drive there was long, winding through thick woods that seemed to close in tighter with every mile. Branches arched above the road like a tunnel, blotting out the sun. When I finally arrived, the place looked like paradise and nightmare combined. The cabin sat alone beside a still black lake, its surface glassy and unnatural. A fire pit with wooden chairs circled it like a ritual site. Everything was too quiet. The first thing I noticed stepping out of the car was the silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, no frogs croaked from the lake. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched. I shrugged it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid. The cabin was larger than expected, like a vacation home dropped in the middle of nowhere. Inside, the place was beautiful. Hardwood floors, wide windows, even a game room downstairs with a pool table. But as I walked through the empty rooms, the air felt heavy. The photographs I'd seen online hadn't captured the strange stillness here. It was like walking through a house staged for someone else's life, waiting for people who would never return. That first night, I decided to sit by the fire pit outside. The moon reflected off the lake, pale and distorted. I leaned back in one of the chairs, trying to enjoy the peace. Then I heard it, a faint crunch of footsteps in the grass behind me. My breath caught. Slowly I turned, expecting to see a deer or raccoon, but the clearing was empty. Only the lake rippled, as though something had disturbed its surface. The uneasy feeling followed me back inside. I locked the doors, even though I wasn't sure what I was locking out. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. My blood turned to ice. I had deadbolted it myself. Slowly, I reached for the lamp, but in that exact instant, the power went out. The cabin was swallowed by complete darkness. I froze, listening. From the hallway, I heard a whisper, low, deliberate, and far too close. "You shouldn't have come here." My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown out the sound. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whisper came again, this time from the foot of my bed, though no figure stood there in the dark. I grabbed my phone, desperate for light, but the screen flickered and died the moment I unlocked it. It was as if the cabin itself rejected electricity. I sat in pitch blackness, paralyzed, until dawn bled through the curtains. When I finally gathered the courage to check the door, it was still locked, my deadbolt untouched. Had I dreamed it? The next day I tried to shake off the night. I walked along the lake, letting the cold water lap at my boots. The forest pressed close, silent as ever. Then I noticed something strange. In the mud near the shore were footprints. Not mine. Bare, human footprints, leading into the trees and vanishing among the undergrowth. That night, I tried to distract myself by playing pool in the game room, but as I lined up a shot, I heard the creak of footsteps upstairs, heavy, deliberate. I froze, cue stick in hand. The sound moved slowly from one end of the cabin to the other, directly above me. When I climbed the stairs, there was nothing. Every room was empty. Back downstairs, the pool balls I had set up were scattered across the floor, as though someone had swiped the table clean in anger. My hands trembled as I backed away. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew I was not alone. On the third night, I woke again at 3 a.m., the same time as before. A scraping sound echoed from the hallway, like fingernails dragging along wood. My throat went dry. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside my room. Then, silence. I barely slept. In the morning, I opened the door and saw long, jagged scratches carved into the wood of the hallway floor. They stretched all the way to my bedroom door. I ran my fingers over them. They were real. Something had been there, something with claws. Desperate, I called the owner. My voice shook as I asked if anything strange had ever happened at the cabin. She paused for a long time before whispering, "I told you, it's that time of year." And then she hung up. My stomach dropped. I realized she had rented me the place on purpose, knowing what would come. That evening, I tried to leave. I packed my bags and loaded the car. But when I turned the key, the engine sputtered once and died. The battery was fine, the fuel tank full, yet the car refused to start. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches scraping against the roof, as though they didn't want me to leave. That night, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Every creak of the cabin made my chest tighten. At around 2:45 a.m., I heard it again, the sound of the front door slowly opening. This time, I didn't move. I lay perfectly still, eyes wide, listening as soft footsteps moved through the living room and stopped outside my door. The handle turned. I clutched the blanket to my chest, too terrified to scream. The door creaked open, just an inch, before slamming shut with a force that rattled the walls. My lamp flickered on by itself, dim and weak, casting a sickly glow across the room. The reflection in the mirror across from me didn't match my own movements. I bolted from the room, stumbling into the hallway. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the cabin itself was pressing down on me. At the far end of the hall, I thought I saw a shadow slip into one of the rooms. My body screamed at me to leave, but when I grabbed the front door handle, it wouldn't turn. The lock had jammed from the inside. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, my back against the wall, clutching a kitchen knife I'd pulled from a drawer. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional sound of scratching from somewhere deep inside the walls. Something was moving inside the cabin with me. Morning light was a relief, though it did little to ease my fear. I walked to the lake, hoping fresh air would clear my mind. But when I reached the shoreline, I froze. The footprints were back. This time there were dozens, circling the fire pit in perfect rings. Each bare print pressed deep into the mud, as though a crowd had gathered around the cabin while I slept. I stumbled back inside, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But as I passed the game room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Words had been scrawled into the dust on the pool table. 4 letters, jagged and uneven. Leave. I tried the car again that evening, desperate to escape, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. My phone was dead. No matter how long I left it plugged in, technology didn't work here. I was cut off completely. When night fell, I felt the weight of the woods pressing against the walls of the cabin, as though the trees themselves were watching. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of voices outside, dozens of them, whispering in unison. I crept to the window, heart in my throat, and saw shapes standing around the fire pit. Dark silhouettes, unmoving, their heads tilted toward the cabin. When I blinked, they were gone. The chairs sat empty, the clearing deserted. I backed away from the window, but as I did, the glass fogged over from the inside. A handprint appeared on the pane, pressing against the glass. Though no one stood there, my breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back into the hallway, the lights flickering overhead, and then went out completely. The scratching began again, louder this time. From the ceiling, from the walls, even from beneath the floorboards. It was everywhere at once. I covered my ears, but the sound still crawled into my skull. Then, out of the dark, came the whisper, "You shouldn't have come here." The cabin shook violently, as if something massive was moving through the woods around it. The windows rattled, the doors slammed open and shut. I dropped to the floor, covering my head, certain the house would collapse on top of me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, the sun was already high. My body ached, my mind foggy. I checked the front door again, and this time it opened easily, as though nothing had ever been wrong. But outside, the ground around the fire pit was scorched black, as if something had burned there during the night. Panic clawed at me. I gathered my things, determined to hike out on foot. I didn't care how far the nearest town was. I had to leave. I followed the dirt road for hours, but somehow, no matter which direction I walked, I always ended up back at the cabin. The lake shimmered beside it, mocking me with its stillness. That night, I sat in the living room broken. The whispers started again, not outside this time, but inside. They came from every direction, growing louder until they formed words. Stay, forever. My vision blurred, my chest tightened. I knew then that the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted me. The last thing I remember is standing at the window, staring out at the lake. My reflection didn't move when I did. It smiled, though I didn't. Behind the reflection, in the dark water, dozens of pale faces stared back at me. When I blinked, the glass was empty again, but the whisper lingered in my ear, soft and final. You'll never leave.